Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Sewell. I work at TrinityP3, and we're going to have a chat for about an hour on the challenges for marketers in a carbon-constrained future. What we'll discuss today is environment, sustainability, various terms bandied around, but what does this actually mean? We could spend the whole hour talking about the problems with the planet, but obviously today's focus is on how it affects marketers. But we'll have I'll give you a couple of brief thoughts on what's actually occurring now. Then we'll talk about, so there's all these problems with the world, and who's responsible? People consume various forms of media, but who actually should take responsibility for the environmental impact of that consumption? We'll talk about some challenges for marketers, and then we'll look at individual channels and the change, how that's all changing, and then what you can do. Then we'll look at some benefits, which include some case studies. I'll talk you through 4 case studies. One is about a product and how they actually changed that to be a better environmental outcome. And the other 3 are marketers who have done work understanding what the carbon in each case, a footprint was, and what they were actually doing about it, and how they were using it in a marketing context. Then we'll summarise. So, without further ado, we'll take it away, and please ask any questions as we go through. So, is there a crisis? We can spend, we could spend easily an hour on this subject alone, but we're not going to do that. If allegedly the most powerful man on earth believes there is, the rhetoric that's coming out, you look at the Australian last few days, it's even on the front page of the Australian, but there is something going on as we lead up to Paris later this month and into December to try and get some consensus around the globe on what to do about it. There's one area I'd like to, it would be good if you actually want some further reading, which Ross Gideon's had a good article in the Sydney Morning Herald, where he reviewed the CSIRO Australian National Outlook report, where it was talking about different scenarios that they've painted for what would happen with growth in the economy and how that would affect the planet. Scientists used a term that we live on a finite planet, and their first law of thermodynamics says we can't continue to grow if it's actually if we live on a constrained planet. So that's going to cause environmental issues. Have a read of that. As I say, if you want to actually have a look at what it actually means for us and consumers, which is obviously very important for us marketers. But firstly, we'll talk about who's responsible anyway. I'll paint a bit of a picture of what it looks like the impact is. Now we need to find some sort of common language when we talk about impact. Some of you make products that have an impact in themselves when they're actually produced. Others supply services. The most common language we can actually use to compare one either products or one output or one media channel is to actually use carbon as a base measurement. So the language that we use today is around carbon and what the carbon impact is from anything that's to do with marketing. It just gives us a common base. So firstly, the first thing to look at is, I did this a few years ago. I had another look this morning and yesterday and the day before on what sort of figures we reckon we spend on advertising per annum. E-marketer said just recently the top 6 countries spend $600 billion US on advertising. So yeah, there's something obviously occurring there that must have some sort of impact. So of that, again, looking at that paper making, which everyone assumes is going to be the most environmentally unfriendly thing we can do when we communicate, uses 75 billion kilowatts per annum, which obviously sounds like a lot. Now, not all of that is used for marketing. There's education, there's books, there's other things, but obviously a percentage that would be of that 600 billion would be used to communicate, to sell things, to sell services and products. Then we have the big one, which is the data centers and servers. Now, this data's a couple of years old. I would argue that that's actually gone up a lot, 61 billion kilowatt hours. It's overtaken, it's becoming very, very big. And that's because of the size of the files that we're now sending, video content, when we talk about things moving around the internet. it's big video files that are being moved. So there's more storage capacity, more things actually occurring now. So they're numbers. What does that actually mean? So what I've done is I've translated that into the common language, which you said would be carbon. So that figure of 600 billion, we've got a methodology we use in the system called the CO2 counter to calculate what that would actually look like. This is not the production, this is just purely the consumption, so the media channel that we actually choose. So when it's actually consumed at the end time by obviously the consumer. So that's about 300 million tonnes per annum of carbon would be attributed to advertising itself. Again, that's a big figure. What does that actually mean? What's a comparison of that? That's around 230 million average fuel-efficient cars running around the road. So the scenario I'm painting here is, yes, there is an impact, but the question is actually what we can do about it and who's actually doing something. So if we took that as a figure, that's actually a lot of carbon being put into the atmosphere just by us advertising, selling our products and services. So who's actually doing something about it? I pulled this off again yesterday looking at big lists. You've got the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. This one's from a company called CDP, operates out of the UK. They're asking for companies to send in and pledge to actually do something in line with what's occurring in Paris at the end of this month and next month. What actually concrete things they're doing to decrease their carbon footprint and be more sustainable as a business. Now, if we look at this list, we have, pick out a few: Nike, Pirelli, Nestle. What else have we got here? Royal Dutch Shell, which is an interesting one. There's a lot of healthcare products on here. This is only a sample. There was 230 companies had actually pledged to actually be very to actually do something in line with what was occurring. Most of the rhetoric that will come out of Paris and any sort of agreement will be all very well and good and trying to set some targets, but it's actually up to business to do something. So these businesses, and we've actually done some work with Siemens, who are very much into this space and actually have a very, very good sustainability policy and want their supply chain to also understand and reduce carbon where they can. So there is a lot of companies doing this, and this is where any movement outside Paris will be. It will be at a corporate level, in my view. So the question is, if there's this amount of carbon, which we said around about 300 million tonnes per annum, who's responsible for the addition of carbon caused by advertising? So the argument goes, if there was no advertising in, let's say, a newspaper, the newspaper would be smaller. Therefore, there'd be less manufacturing required, there'd be less paper used, therefore there'd be a less of a footprint. So one would argue that an advertiser who actually takes that space to increase the size of that newspaper should take responsibility for the carbon that's produced by that space that they're taking. Same can be true on radio or TV or online. Actually using more of those servers and those data centers and the electricity used to power your iPhone or your computer. It will be slightly smaller, but it starts becoming significant when we talk about the sort of volumes we're actually doing. And a lot of, obviously, channels are used very much so as an advertising medium as opposed to an education or a medium. So therefore, I put the case that advertisers are definitely responsible for their contribution when they actually go and sell their products and services. So let's look at a few channels one by one, and I'll give you a broad overview. Again, time won't let us go. So I think everyone's most probably quite comfortable who understand sustainability. Years ago we talked about not printing things anymore. So this top list here are this one's brochures, leaflets, direct mail out of outdoor advertising. There'd be obviously we can see pieces of paper used. That's cutting down trees. Therefore, there's an issue there. Out of home, we also, when the sun goes down, we also tend to light those up. Therefore, electricity consumption, coal power power stations in this country and elsewhere mean that there's actually a carbon footprint for the actual generation of that power to light those like those outdoor billboards as well. So there's clearly a footprint there if one chooses to go into that medium to sell goods and services. Newspapers and magazines, I don't think anyone deliberately goes out to buy for the advertising. They go to buy to be either entertained, amused, or kept up to date with the news. So in this case, we'd actually say the contribution would be the space that's actually taken within these. The top ones, the print ones, normally you find they're done only for advertising, only to sell a product or service, where newspapers actually are taking part of that space, so should only be responsible for the part that you're actually taking. We talk about radio, cinema and TV. Again, people don't deliberately go there to look at the communication that's on there, the advertising communication. They go there to be entertained. Therefore, again, just a percentage that's actually used for advertising should be counted against the advertiser's carbon budget. And therefore, we need an understanding of what that would be. And that's going to be predominantly electricity usage, and therefore the carbon from the generation of that. And then there's the big one, which online in the internet. This is growing, as I said earlier. The video content is growing, the channels are expanding, things are moving away from those top three at a rate of knots into this area. So we do want to have a bit of a concentration on what those effects are. But firstly, I'll just give you a little bit more detail around why paper's bad. One could argue that trees are a crop the same way as wheat is a crop. Therefore, it's actually a renewable resource and we can actually plant it again. So a well-organised plantation forest is actually not a bad thing, but there still is a carbon footprint if it's not actually managed properly. This is from the Daily Mirror in the UK. Every newspaper that was sold, there was a proper life cycle assessment done, and it was 174 grams of carbon for every newspaper that was actually generated. The pink area you can actually see there is actually the paper. So this is actually the amount of carbon to actually cut the trees down, to actually convert that, pull that apart to get the fibre, to make the actual paper making process, to ship that paper to the printing plant, and then to actually obviously manufacture it. Some of the smaller ones there are ink, a bit of delivery of the newspaper, the manufacturing, which is electricity. But with anything that's paper-based, the main footprint is coming from the paper itself. So whether it be recycled or whether it be virgin, there are various pieces of research around that they're not very far away from an environmental impact point of view, because even if recycled paper is being recommended and it's a policy of the organisation, it still does have an impact because it started as a tree, it's been picked up many times, and the de-inking and actually remaking into usable paper does again have a high electricity content. Therefore, there is a footprint around that as well. So there's no real free rides when we talk about paper, but one could also view it as a renewable resource if managed properly. So let's go back to the internet. The recent figures I looked at, it's the 6th largest commercial use of electricity globally. It's actually going to data centres and servers. There's a lot of work going on with Googles and Apples to make sure that these centres are using as much renewable energy as possible, but it's a massive task. So we're at 10% of the total commercial electricity consumption going to this area. It's actually big. So obviously we know that not all of that amount of electricity is going purely to the advertising content, but a lot of channels now, Facebook, Twitter, anything else we actually look at is actually generates this revenue through the selling of advertising. So therefore those channels do have to take some responsibility for what's occurring. So with a lot of internet users and growing, as we know, very, very quickly, and that growth's around 800% in the last 5 years alone. So we can see that that's a growth area that we have to watch very carefully. So taking things away from paper, which we can clearly see has a high carbon footprint, and putting it online yes, if it's targeted, it's good, but if we don't target it and we just go for a big scattergun approach because it's cost effective, there's still a big impact actually in there. So we just have to be careful and be aware that there's some challenges in there. I'll just touch on that a little bit more before I move on. Here's some work we did a couple of years ago, just taking each of the actual channels themselves, which were the main ones here, and looked at what the carbon footprint would be for each dollar spent. Now, there we see radio. As you can see, again, we're not talking about the actual production of the content, we're talking purely about the actual delivery of that content through those channels. Radio is extremely low because we plug that in. If we drive in the car, there's not much of a footprint. We're not using much more gasoline if we turn the radio on or the radio's off. So therefore, there's a lot of free rides actually in there. So radio can be consumed at a very low carbon footprint. Press, we talked about outdoor. Obviously, we're using tape, so therefore that's gone up. And online's, 0.3 grams. I would actually argue this is a few years old. Now this data, and we've commissioned some more work in this area to get some more up-to-date figures, but it moves very quickly. I would argue that that's higher. I said video content is becoming more and more and more. I saw an interesting article the other day talking about Twitter, and they were saying what a wonderful low carbon footprint Twitter had. They're saying it was 0.05 grams for every tweet, and obviously that's not very much, but the statistic is around 500 million tweets are sent every day. So if one converted that 0.05 grams, you get about 250 tonnes of carbon going purely by those tweets. Now, they're not necessarily advertising, but just give you a context that when you start talking volumes, which we do on the internet, the number's actually still there. It doesn't go away. It's not a free ride. With the average, the average around all mediums was around about that 0.5 grams. So although small, we just need to be selective. So I suppose what this tells us is just target and just be careful where we select. Everything has an impact, and I'll come to that in a case study and show how that actually works. Just to stay on impact again on various media channels. Again, this one's a couple of years old, but it's still relevant. And again, I'd argue that online would be more than 41% now, even though we can actually target a lot more to find our actual consumers we're looking at. So this was some work we did. We asked a well-known media buying company that we needed to reach 1 million grocery buyers by each of these channels: radio, press, cinema, outdoor, online, TV, magazines. So how much how much media do we have to buy in each of those separate channels to have 1 million grocery buyers actually see the message and therefore achieve that number? So TV, obviously, grocery buyers, that's actually quite an easy one. There was 32% of the emissions that we calculated using a CO2 counter to understand what that impact was. So 32% of the emissions would come from TV, so about a third. Online was the highest because it wasn't particularly targeted. You had to go to more than 1 million people to actually get 1 million grocery buyers, so the number was quite high. Outdoor was very low because you could put those strategic billboards in the right place to actually see people going past them. Cinema again was quite low. It's a low footprint, but again you could pick the shows and be very targeted. Radio was the same. Magazines again was lower than TV because you could target by picking the right publications to actually go there. So again, online, I think today online would actually be used quite a lot. It's used quite a lot, online shopping, etc. When this was done, it was an interesting view that people didn't see, that you have to be careful. It's about targeting. If things aren't targeted, they've got a high footprint, even though they go online. Let's look at a few case studies. Let's start one which was, obviously I don't know all your products and services, but the best thing any business can do is look at how they deliver their products and services and work there. Marketing is only responsible for the selling of those products and services, so they can do so much. But this was a good case study that came out, and it was conducted by the Carbon Trust out of the UK. And they were asked to go and do a life cycle analysis for Walkers who make chips, crisps. And the question was, can you look at the whole way we make these potato chips and see what we can do to actually improve our carbon footprint? So we know how to make chips. We grow potatoes, we fry them, we put them in packets, we put them on the supermarket shelf. The interesting thing was, obviously, this company had been looking at the most cost-effective way of producing these because they're running a business and they want to get the maximum revenue. But they'd never looked at it from an environmental point of view. So to have someone come in not looking at cost cutting to look at what the footprint is was different for them. And what they found was they were looking at the potato growers. They were then, what they were doing, they'd had an arrangement in place that potatoes were sold on weight. So you'd buy potatoes and pay the farmers how much they weighed. So what the potato farmers were doing, who were supplying, were putting these in a large warehouse and actually humidifying the air to actually so the moisture content would increase to make the potatoes heavier. And then it'd be transported across and go through the standard process. Now, the price was okay. Obviously, everyone looked at the price and they'd do the best deal, but they clearly had some environmental impact from doing two things. One was actually the electricity required to warehouse and put the water content into the potatoes would need power. Therefore, that came up very strongly as a bad thing to do from an environmental point of view because of the carbon footprint from the electricity consumed. And then the transport costs would go up. We had heavier product being moved to produce the same end product. So we had higher carbon from the transport of the goods. And then the making of crisps or chips, you have to get rid of all the moisture content. Therefore, the manufacturing costs are going up, the electricity consumption to do that. So we had this strange scenario. It had been in place for a long, long time to actually do this, and everyone's happy until I looked at it from an environmental point of view. They changed it. They started to buy on volume. So that actually took carbon out of two places. Obviously, there was some people with those factories weren't particularly happy, but from Walker's point of view, this was actually a really good environmental outcome, and surprise, surprise, it was actually a better cost-effective point of view. So there's an example of a product that you can actually, looking at our own products, understanding it, but not viewing it from cost-cutting, looking at it from an environmental point of view. What can we do to make that? I think that's standing the test of time, that case study, and I always use it. I think it's a very good one and quite simple. Let's look at some that are closer to home around marketing. So we've been doing this work for about 7 years at TrinityP3, and I'll give you 3 examples that we've done. First one, a major company, international company. They actually were claiming that their product was the first in their category to be 100% carbon offset. Therefore, the whole marketing was based around being carbon neutral. So this was very much a green product, and they did this. They had a life cycle analysis done of the product, and then they offset the emissions, which was very good. What they missed was actually then they had to go and sell this product. They had to inform the consumers. Therefore, they had a multi-tier marketing campaign, which involved TV, some outdoor, some trade press, talking about how green this product was. So what they'd missed out on this, because we have these careful in Australia, the AEST was looking about greenwashing, was to measure what the actual advertising and marketing was as well. To claim it's 100% green and not include the communication of this product to people who are going to buy it would actually be a problem. They had to include that as well. So we did the work in that case. So we carried out a review of the media and the production buy and applied the appropriate carbon readings based on the methodology we have. We did that in 48 hours. It wasn't a big thing for them. So the system enabled the client to comply with a legislative requirement. It cost them slightly more to offset and claim that positioning, but at least they had no legal problems with what they were going to market. An interesting aside, the biggest footprint they had from any of their channels was outdoor. They built these wonderful sites with greenery growing up, so there's pot plants. These are fantastic. They were fantastic until the sun went down and they lit them up. So everyone can see these wonderful green billboards in after dark. This obviously had slipped everyone's mind that there was electricity being consumed, therefore a footprint being generated. And once we pointed this out to them, they went and spoke to the outdoor company and arranged to have solar fitted to the billboards, so it was a win-win for everybody. So good learnings. This started off as just a compliance issue to make sure there's no legal problems, but it turned out that they could become a more green product as they actually did that when they went to market. The second one we look at is a large local council who will look at the rest of the business was actually was mandated to actually save carbon where they could, but marketing was sitting to one side to a large extent. And when they heard about the work we were doing, they actually wanted to see what they can do, because all their carbon would be outside the boundary of the organisation itself. It's quite a council will obviously sit in a building, therefore if they change the light bulbs, they could actually have better recycling policies in place. They can less water use. They can do all those things because it's within their boundary. But when marketing, most of the work is done with their suppliers or with their channels, so therefore they can't really control. So what they wanted to do was understand what the footprint was when they were going out to inform the public of their services. So they actually wanted to understand it. So we worked through this with them, again, using the same methodologies we've used before. Look at the media spend, understand how many people actually being targeted and what the reach was in each of the channels. And then we did this for a complete year. This took a little bit longer. We had some of the trouble getting the data from the media companies because this was a bit new for them. They normally talk only in dollars. We weren't interested in the amount of money they were spending. We talked about the number of people, or the amount of newspapers being consumed, the amount of magazines being consumed, the amount of people actually watching on TV. We were interested in that sort of detail, which wasn't readily available, but it is now. So what they did was, we then went through a training exercise with both the clients and the media company and the agency themselves, so they understood what the impacts were, like we looked at earlier, those various areas, what the different channels was and what they could do without affecting the effective communication. So the strategy could be tweaked slightly to still get the same outcome, but do it in a lower carbon footprint way. So it was about benchmarking, understanding, and then actually adjusting as you could. So this was good, and therefore marketing could actually claim with the rest of the departments they were actually doing their bit to reduce the footprint, which was in line with the council's policy. This one we did 3 weeks ago. Very large US pharmaceutical company. Dealing with they were dealing with a big print group, and they were looking to be more sustainable in their marketing. Now the idea was that they did know who they wanted to talk to, therefore they'd actually try to switch as quickly as they could to go online and do email campaigns. But the question was being asked, okay, just do an email, is a zero footprint. Well, as we demonstrated earlier, if it goes online, yes, it's much smaller, but it depends how well it's done. But this is a classic case where the traditional way, they were printing brochures, putting in envelopes, putting them through the postal system, and compare that to emailing a PDF and actually delivering it into the inbox. So we actually run the scenarios around those two things, because they wanted to make this claim and they couldn't make the claim unless they'd actually done the measurement. It seems obvious that one would imagine it's a lower carbon footprint, but no one really knew. So we ran this through the CO2 counter again to give them some third-party validation of what they were doing, and the difference was huge. as you can imagine, they're very targeted. They were talking to doctors. They actually knew where they were. They could send them a PDF, much smaller footprint, and they could demonstrate that. And therefore, what that enabled them to do was to enter into sustainability awards with evidence-based third-party validation that this is what was occurring, going from the old scenario of everything was going out in the mail to actually doing it where it was actually all emailed. So again, I've shown you 3 different case studies that are marketing related. One was around compliance or legislative. One was around the marketing department wanted to be on board, which was a policy that the business had and feeling a bit left out. Or they were, what do? We just say we're green because the rest of the business is green. What do we do? And the third one was to promote themselves, to be seen more green in amongst their peers and amongst when they're actually out there selling their products. It gives their salespeople a bit of a boost as well. They're actually out there selling to say that they're doing all they can, and this was a demonstration of what they were doing in marketing as well as the rest of the business. I'll touch briefly on the CO2 counter because I've mentioned it a few times. So it's methodology around carbon being what we're using as the common currency across either the production or the consumption of the marketing communication. And what it is another weighting that can be used by people who want to go down this path to understand when they're actually planning a media. So everything's going to be about targeting. We talk about carbon is actually joined at the hip with waste. So the more efficient or the more targeted things become, the actually less carbon will be, regardless of the media channel. As we know, if you printed something that was slightly smaller, there'd be less paper consumed. If you could actually reach those grocery buyers looked at in a bit more efficiently, you only needed 100 outdoor billboards as opposed to 200. It's going to save you money as well as it will actually save carbon. So, but it is obviously not going to be led by that, but it's another conversation to have and get all the partners in place in the world to have this discussion to understand it, because it is, although this has been around for a while, I think with the Paris coming up, and there'll be a lot more emphasis on everybody has to do their bit. Everyone has to actually start understanding what their footprint is and actually do what they can. So it's not about this BHP or not digging up coal. It's going to be around everybody. How quickly that will occur will depend on the speed that we see guidance or legislation coming in. We had a carbon tax in Australia. That's gone. That wasn't affecting advertising directly, but that was just the first step in a pathway which will lead to more requirements around business. And the costs of electricity go up, and they will go up again. The conversation is around, it should be around $50. We'll see as a tax one day, shortly, and therefore that will affect everything we do, and it will be a cost of marketing. So the quicker we actually understand that, the better we can actually get those messages out to the audience. I suppose the old adage from John Wanamaker, I know half my advertising budget is wasted, but I'm not sure which half. Adding that layer of understanding environmental aspect as well, that could improve that percentage. This gives it, it helps everyone focus again on that targeting and reducing waste in the way we communicate. So marketers are specialists for finding effective return on investment for your business. So this system helps give us strategic and some strategies around how you actually can implement those in an effective manner. So we've talked about some of the things that are actually occurring and the different channels. Let's talk about some benefits that are over and above just being good to the planet. The big one, and I think you'll find that a lot of those people on that list about brand image and reputation. This is obviously, it does sit on many companies' balance sheets, therefore there is it's a non-tangible benefit, but it's actually still sitting there. It adds to the shareholders' value on brand, obviously major brands like Coca-Cola, on Nike, but on everyone, it's about corporate reputation. Therefore, if you're seen to be sustainable and you're actually practicing what you preach, it's got to be a good thing. So it's okay doing this and claiming it until something goes astray. I think we all know the classic example is Volkswagen. If you looked on their website, they were a green company, they were extremely efficient, and they've blown that reputation apart by doctoring those figures. It's actually sent that share price down, and that's an environmental issue they had around that. They've fudged something they should have done. And that can be true of any company, setting out policies, then following those, and then monitoring those and managing those in all parts of the business. Obviously, that was it's a narrow marketing problem to actually repair the damage, but that wasn't that was actually a problem elsewhere in the business. But it does show us the important and the benefit of doing this properly, that how your reputation and the value of the business actually increases. Another big one we see a lot is, especially when we're talking to the younger generation, keeping staff happy. So that's keeping them in the business and also attracting people to the business as well. So a clearly defined environmental policy or sustainable policy that actually sits there, that's part of the induction, is actually understood what that company stands for, what those employees can actually do to contribute is very important. So if one's looking at how to be more sustainable, it doesn't necessarily be something we actually tell everybody about, or the customers, unless we're doing it really, really well. It can actually be used internally to actually motivate everybody. And of course, recruitment costs in any organisation is expensive. So therefore, to attract those young people and keep them there, will reduce that expense. So the other one is stand out from the crowd. If it's a genuine sustainability program, it can help you win and retain clients. A lot of online work that we see is very much talk about how green they are. A lot of small businesses can pop up using the joys of the internet to actually promote very environmentally friendly garage generated products and services. A lot of claims actually go in there, but what's actually behind those? So to have a measurement on the products and services would be the first thing that any marketer should be looking at. But the next thing would be when we actually go to market, how can we actually get that reduced as much as possible? And then when we reduce as much as we can, should we put a relevant and verified offsetting program in place? And then we can claim that we're doing everything we can. We see a lot of business-to-business work where we're seeing more and more suppliers are having to not just tick the box to say they're green or they're recycled paper, but to actually demonstrate that they can supply data that says what their footprint is from the supply of those goods or services into that customer. So a very big thing in tenders, and customers are more aware and actually answering these questions as well. Social media is allowing looking for feedback from these people now, and I'm sure a large percentage of this feedback is around sustainability and what are you doing. You need to be able to answer those questions. So it's actually something that needs to be done very, very properly. Philanthropy and future-proofing. Philanthropy, an area that is difficult to quantify, but you shouldn't have to quantify it. There's some companies that do this, and just for the sake of actually doing it. So we don't need to put any measurement or actually around it, but it's one of the major leaders of investment in this space. And companies doing this are because they believe it's the right thing to do. So therefore, there's no direct benefit that we can put on the balance sheet, but they believe that's actually there, and having voluntary offsets. It does give them a very, very high sustainability pass mark, which is pretty good. So to summarise, we've talked about is there a crisis? I believe maybe it's a strong word, but something needs to occur, and it will actually countries actually trying to make an agreement. It's going to be extremely difficult, but big businesses all over the world are doing things, and they want to actually work with other companies who are actually doing something in this space. Saying it and actually demonstrating or giving evidence is really where business needs to go. It needs to actually show evidence that they're actually doing something with their product and services, but also when you go to market, to also think about that we're doing that in the most environmentally friendly way. So I would argue that you need to actually do something to input, because this will pick up. There will be a cost of business. It will creep in. Carbon tax out. Carbon tax will come back in some form in this country, but any multinational is dealing with this and actually have already allowed for this. There will be a cost of business for emission of carbon. Therefore, business needs to survive. And if we look at that time zone, in 10 to 15 years, you need to be really, really on the ball in that time. But it takes a long time to get there if you haven't started. And that does include actually working with people who are outside of your building, your boundary of your operation itself, to make sure they're on board. The building industry is a classic one, whereas obviously an architect can actually be very green in their office, but when actually the builders, how do you actually educate those and get them to come along to actually build make the construction in an environmentally friendly way? And then when it's built, how do the marketers do that in an environmentally friendly way they can? And the key is the longer one actually procrastinates, the higher the cost to catch up becomes. So I do actually say to you all, keep reading and looking at what's going on. It is all over the media. There is a change in public opinion. So that means consumers' opinion around this. So you have to actually get organised, understand where you are today, so you can be prepared for tomorrow, because it is coming. Will it be constrained? It will be constrained by cost. It will be constrained by customer sentiment and business sentiment with people you want to actually partner with. So I would say that it will be a carbon-constrained future in one way or the other. What that time is, we don't know. We hope it's a long time, but if we look at the science and the arguments actually going on in now, or the debates going on now, it could be a lot sooner than we think. So we actually do need to be prepared as marketers to actually understand and do what we can to contribute. So that concludes today. I haven't seen any questions, but that's okay. There is one more webinar this year. That's Darren Woolley giving Supercharge Your Agency with incentive-based remuneration. I do encourage you to come along to that one on November the 25th. And I really thank you for your time. If you do have any questions or you'd like to look at this in more detail, please contact me, chris@TrinityP3.com, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you and give you any assistance we can. Thank you very much for your time.